Western civilization is moving closer to a point of irreconcilable, unstable equilibrium, as frighteningly increasing numbers of people trust nothing. Media, academia, and especially the governments are no longer held in high esteem. Regaining trust is often impossible after betrayal. However, transparency is essential to any healing process, and that is the essence of the Don Sullivan Show. Please listen to the team explore, probe, and debate cutting-edge science, technology, and computing. Play ball!
Welcome to the Don Sullivan Show. No, your ears are not deceiving you. It's Jersey Steve. And why? Why is Jersey Steve on and not Don right now? Well, Don is climbing Mount Kilimanjaro, the volcano in Tanzania that's over 19,000 feet. Internet's not great over there, but last I spoke with him, things were going well. And of course, we wish him well and look forward to a few episodes on that in the near future. Of course, he has his trusty recorder with him, and I'm sure it's going to be quite an adventure. But in the interim, we thought we might take a trip down memory lane with you all. It's been over a year since we started the Don Sullivan Show. We've had a lot of wonderful episodes. I personally think all of them have been wonderful, but we thought we might put together a best of Don Sullivan compilation to give everyone snippets of some of the more interesting discussions we've had with folks. But before we dive into that, first, I want to give a shout out to our sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by License Fortress, the industry's first and only software asset management firm to offer both a financial and legal guarantee at its highest level of service. Whether it's Oracle, Microsoft, or VMware, License Fortress helps organizations stay compliant, avoid audits, and save money. Learn more at licensefortress.com. And as always, please support our producer by visiting axtinc.com. That's AXTINK.com. Subscribe to his YouTube channel and help support his efforts to create humorous animation, as well as run our website, all while researching a cure for baldness. So, a quick primer to this Don Sullivan Show, Best of Don Sullivan Show episode. We're going to go by theme. And the first theme we're going to kick off here is when life throws you curveballs, to extend our ongoing baseball analogies here at the Don Sullivan Show. We've had a number of episodes featuring some tremendous people that have overcome all sorts of different adversities in life. And we thought this would be a great way to kind of kick this off. I found all of them to be quite inspirational. So we're going to start off this compilation with a clip from an episode that was rather somber, but also very important because it's something all of us have to deal with in life. It features Anoop, a colleague and buddy of Don. And Anoop lost his wife and wanted to do this episode because he thought sharing how he went through this experience and in dealing with grief and finding ways to, overcome and kind of manage that might be useful to others. And again, it's something we all have to, the older you get, especially, you're all going to end up experiencing life. So we're kicking things off with this one. So strap in, folks, and get ready to travel back in time with us.
I definitely had some physiological effects after my wife's passing. There were even just being lethargic, not wanting to do anything, finding it much harder to be motivated to do the things that I needed to do, even like to put together the funeral. I struggled with some of those things, but I also think it works the other way around. I found when I could get active, when I could eat right, when I could do the things that I had to do to take care of myself and to encourage my son to do the same things, it also helped me to manage those strong emotions, not necessarily manage them away because suppressing those emotions isn't healthy for you either, but managing them in a healthier way, in a way that was better for me, that was better for my son, that was better for those around me. It's a cycle that feeds on itself. right? That first step is the hardest, but you've got to take that first step for your sake and for the sake of the people who, frankly, are probably still counting on you. I had a number of people who were counting on me. And the way I thought about it, and this is probably the wrong way to think of it, but I didn't have the luxury of falling apart. I
Yeah.
had to keep going for my sake and for the sake of those who were counting on
Well,
me.
they count on you both.
Then that can put pressure on you. Yeah.
Yeah, well, materially, emotionally, spiritually, other ways it's hard to define.
Yeah, all of the above. And it did put some pressure on me. And there were times where that was hard, but that pressure also kept me moving. It provided me the motivation that I needed. I had to think about if Heidi would have wanted me to stop and what that would have meant to Caleb, right, my son. I had to think about the other people who were counting on me, and it was what I needed for motivation. It may not work for everybody, right? Everybody's got to find their journey and their way out of this, but finding a way to get yourself moving again, figuratively and literally, right? Exercise, eating well, some of the things that you've talked about in some of your previous podcasts about taking care of yourself help both physically and emotionally to help you cope with some of those things. Yeah, those intrusive thoughts that'll hit you once in a while. They can be tough and they can very quickly derail you.
Well, those are
And you just uh-huh.
those are two perfect. Both you and Steve Anoop have mentioned things that really segue into another interesting point here along these lines. That I have a motto, and it's don't get upset at yourself for being upset. In other words, don't create a vicious cycle of perpetuation of your own self immolation here. Um, don't drive yourself into a perpetuating vortex of depression because you're experiencing what's an entirely reasonable moment of distress. And you just mentioned exactly that. You see something, whatever it might be, an episode of television that you laugh together with, or with me, a moment of sports or something along those lines that reminds you of something. Allow yourself to experience a total reasonable moment of sadness and allow it to work itself out naturally. Does that make sense?
It does, but I also think it goes beyond that moment of sadness. I think it goes to how you manage the grief and how you manage what's going on around you. And this is where a number of people I'd feel bad about not doing certain things I was supposed to do. Like after the funeral, I got a stack of thank you cards from the funeral home that I was supposed to fill out, and I couldn't do it. And it's 6 months later, and I went to somebody and I said, should I start filling these out because I don't feel like I can. And that person said, then don't worry about it. Like no one's going to be mad at you about not filling out a thank you card for coming to the funeral. And if they are, who cares?
Yeah.
And being able to give yourself some of that grace helps a lot. And it probably seems like a silly thing, but it makes a big deal. I mean, the other side of it is I can't tell you how many times I got a phone call or a text from someone at just the right time and it got me through it. But the other side of it was I had a number of people who called me a couple months later who said, I didn't want to bother you. And what I'd say is if you have someone who's close to you who's dealing with grief, don't let that stop you. You can ignore a text. You can delete a text. You can silence your phone. What you can't do is force someone to call you.
That's a unbelievably great point because what they're doing, what you will be doing in sometime in the future with somebody else, maybe me, maybe Stephen, is continuing life, living the next day and living the next moment, and obviously not ignoring the situation that you're in, but helping somebody get through that next moment. And that's why what you're saying to people, everybody who's listening, is don't hesitate, don't be afraid to reach out and be normal, at least for whatever time you can, especially if there's something really relevant in life. You have a job, you had things to do. You gotta you have to live in that moment and determine what's next and be in that. So I think you really brought up an incredibly good point there.
Yeah, I learned a lot about managing my grief, but I also learned a lot about how I want to help others when they're dealing
Yeah,
with it.
that's great.
It's a silly little thing, right? But I had, and I
Not
was
insignificant.
another specific example, right? I had someone drop off a meal and they left a card, and they specifically said in the card, "Don't have to send us a thank you. Everything that we gave you is disposable. Don't worry about getting us anything back. Don't like those little things that would stress me out.
Yeah,
I didn't have to worry about,
yeah, that's
right?
great
And it may
insight.
seem
Yeah.
minor, it may seem, yeah, but like it took such a weight off of me.
Well, and that
It's
was a
making your
product,
life a
yeah.
little easier.
And that was a product of
Yeah.
the other person being very thoughtful and really
Yeah.
putting effort into what was necessary to help you. And everybody listening and the three of us on this call need to remember that when we're in that opposite situation as well. What can we really do to make things better in that moment?
Okay, this next episode is about a truly remarkable man, Erwin Kollager, someone Don has met on, I think, more than one of his many adventures. He is a mountainist and a ski instructor, and just a world class athlete. I believe he's 75. He's still climbing. And when I say climbing, I mean climbing, dangerous mountains. He is in amazing physical condition. He has an amazing attitude and outlook on life. But he has also faced challenges. And the biggest one, he was a rising star skier. And in his 20s, he got into an absolutely terrible car accident, and one where he could have very easily died. Hurt his back, I believe broke his back. It was a tremendous recovery that had to take place. So this is just an amazing story.
But here I was, and that desire and that burning to become one of the greatest skiers that, I wanted to become at that time. And also taking that skiing already at an early age. And my ideas and travel the world and traveling the biggest mountains and be able to ski the biggest peaks in the world was given to me as, I'm not so sure, it was put in my heart at a very, very early age. And I think that drive to just go with that, just stayed with me for the longest of times, through good and bad. I mean, I was on track to be this great skier that I wanted to be, but then also my dreams sort of very quickly were reduced such a way that I had a very big setback around between 18 to 20 years old. So 2 years of the very most crucial development stages of my career, my young skiing career, racing career for that matter, and also a climbing. I did manage just before my accident actually to accomplish a great racing career up to that time as a junior, but then also become a ski instructor and a backcountry athlete or a backcountry guide. And that really helped me later on after my accident, which took 2 years of time to recuperate, to get into the field and stay in that field that I always dreamed of, even though I couldn't really stay on the very top on the level that I wanted to, but it got me definitely into the direction that later on became my entire world for me. Gave me that opportunity to travel in the same time as teaching in all these beautiful places I've been, right?
Like I said to the audience, if you're not paying attention, this is a truly amazing guy in the sense that I'm going to ask you a question and I'm going to embed something in here that you don't have to get into the details of, because there's, even after 50 years, there's going to be PTSD, but somehow you are one of the most fit people I know. And I don't mean one of the most fit mid 70s people that I know. You are one of the most fit people I know overall, which is absolutely incredible. And over the last 50 plus years, you have been able to accomplish that despite having a broken back and lots of other things and nearly dying in this accident. And I'm obviously changing my tone a little bit from its normal glibness, because this is very, very serious. And I really want the audience to be inspired and understand that the things they can do are, if they have the mental wherewithal, are literally unlimited. If I got anything wrong there,
No.
Irwin, and tell me how you have done that.
Yeah. So I think it all started with my accident at that time. It maybe was something that needed to happen in order for me to move on. That accident wasn't just a small thing. I mean, I literally flew off the road on a race car type of a car that I had at that time. I was a small little racer, Mini Cooper S races in Switzerland. We have a lot of these mountain races, and that's what we did in the summer. And I came home one evening pretty late and just didn't pay that attention. I mean, I literally flew over the road and 300 yards down into a canyon. And there was, and I remember from hitting the first tree and literally bouncing that little car from tree to tree over and over, rolling down this, because I knew exactly where it was. I knew the terrain. It was my home area. And landing shortly on a plateau, on a small plateau, the car came completely to a halt. There were no wheels on there. The thing was crushed like a little sardine box. I just had no doors on it, no nothing. And it came to a halt just shortly before another deep ravine started to happen. If I would have gone down the ravine, I was over. It would have been over. But getting out of the car, and this is probably a little bit more getting into a spiritual intervention there that I had at that particular time. When I got out of the car, I couldn't feel my body. I mean, there was nothing there. I couldn't stand. I couldn't breathe. My pelvis was broken as well. My rib cage was completely busted in. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't do anything. And yet, I was in the pitch dark. It was like 3 o'clock in the morning. And all of a sudden I had this sensation that my life wasn't the end of my life. It could not happen. It just couldn't happen. I was only 18 years old. And I literally remember that plea that I had. I'm laying next to my car, not being able to move. And I said, God, you cannot let me die. and it's somehow I put myself together. I crawled on my knees and my elbows for 2.5, 3 hours up to the roads, where at 6 o'clock in the morning, the first travelers, and it was, in the late 60s, there weren't too many people traveling that particular road with cars, but they did find me just laying on the side of the road. And then I didn't wake up till I was in the hospital. But then I came to my things again in the hospital. So that gave me such a sense of perseverance,
Purpose, yeah.
that, I mean, it took a while for me to come back and, and get back on, especially
2 years.
Yeah, 2 years, right? But it gave me that great sense of what happened to me wasn't as a joke. It happened for a reason. It happened to strengthen my belief in whatever I was doing later on, and to learn from it.
All right. This next episode features Stuart Klugler, and was a relatively recent episode for us. And it was about brain tumors, how they can be life-altering, even when they're not life-threatening. And here are some clips from that. In this episode, we spoke with Stu, who lives with multiple acoustic neuromas. And these are benign tumors that grow on the auditory nerve, and can affect hearing, balance, and daily life in very profound ways. And this story explores what survival really means when the danger is not death, but is permanent change. Stu, how did you figure out, or how did you learn that you had these brain tumors?
Well, at first, I always used the phone in my left ear. And then all of a sudden, I couldn't I had to switch to the right ear. And I asked a good friend of mine who's an audiologist, what should I do? And he said, get a hearing test. And I went for a hearing test. And basically, I only had 30% word recognition. So it was pretty
Oh,
bad.
yeah. So at that point, they recommended you go to a specialist and get some x-rays.
Yeah. Also, this is 2001, 2002 time frame. MRIs were available, but it wasn't like their first choice. So I went and had some kind of brain response test, showed something was wrong, and then eventually I had an MRI. And the MRI showed the 3.5 centimeter acoustic neuroma. I felt sorry for myself, which is very hard to overcome, especially when it's your brain, which controls basically everything. And, I think in Savannah, unfortunately, my mom passed away December of 2025, and she didn't give
Oh, I'm
me.
sorry.
She's a former school teacher. She's from Bayonne, and no nonsense. And she didn't give me time to feel sorry for myself. So I owe her a lot of credit.
Yeah,
I'll
it
attest
sounds
to
like
it.
just yeah, it sounds like it would be easy to feel sorry for yourself in that scenario, but you've got
Yeah,
to
it
find ways
doesn't
to
get you
stay
anything.
positive. Yeah, you've got to find a way to overcome that.
Yeah, or at least make the most out of each day.
Exactly.
All at bats are situational. I'll say it earlier.
You're getting it in early, but that is true, Don.
I'll say it again later, but it's a perfect teachable moment for the motto of the Don Sullivan Show.
Okay, so this next clip is from another somewhat recent Don Sullivan Show episode. It was entitled "The Missing Half: Why Women Remain Underrepresented in Silicon Valley." And we wanted to understand why there is such a striking gender gap. Why, when women make up half the population and half the available talent, are they so underrepresented across the companies that make up Silicon Valley? And why does this same pattern persist across much of the technology industry? So, to explore this issue, we invited veteran Silicon Valley executive Shiny Shaw to join our team. And together we dug into the realities behind those numbers and the cultural and structural forces at play, and ultimately what meaningful progress could actually look like. Yeah, there do seem to be a lot of females in marketing roles, based on my experience. But yeah, when it comes to the people on the more technical side, just from my own personal experience working with them, oftentimes they're males. So I do think she's onto something there. Uh, I know that Shiny, that Silicon Valley has been described before as a boys' club. Do you think it kind of still is? Has it improved in any meaningful way over the years?
I think it's definitely still a boys' club. I think it varies kind of by company and by department and by honestly like the hiring manager. The bias is definitely still there. So I did some digging a little bit to kind of prep for this call because I didn't want to just like make shit up and Shiny's perception. So it's founded based on study. So going back to what I just said, the Harvard business case, they actually put a case study together where they said they created a fictional, successful Silicon Valley venture capitalist. And everything was identical in these two case studies, except one venture capitalist was named Heidi and one was named Howard. And the likability, the competence that was evaluated by the students was like, but the likability, Howard was viewed as assertive, strategic, and a leader. Heidi was viewed as aggressive, selfish, and not a person that they'd want to work for. And so one of the things is like, this is still relevant,
And let me ask,
in
was
our
sort of a
language.
blind,
Mhm.
Shani, just let me, for the audience, this was
Yeah.
a blind study, right?
Correct.
Yeah,
Yep.
okay.
This
Yeah,
was a
go ahead.
blind study. The case studies were handed to a group of MBA students at Harvard, and then they were asked to kind of on this. So you didn't know which case study that you got. And so it was shocking that on the likability, on the competence scale, they were rated equally. The likability scale, it was stark different. And one of the things I just kind of want to also point out, just in the English language, it's like, the words you say, it's like, oh, she's a working mom. Oh, she's a chatty Cathy, Debbie Downer, negative Nancy, right? And so it's like these words, like they matter language matters. And it's like how we society these languages, and it just seeps in that whole unconscious bias. It kind of creates the noise in the system. And as a result, going back, it's just through every step of a woman's career, they are being judged, especially particularly in the technical field, whether they are competent or not, through the biases and the patterns that have historically been. It's a balance in knowing that I have a very narrow likability window, knowing that people are judging my competence, not because of the outcomes, but because of, my gender and how I look. And so this is kind of a tightrope that myself and every woman, needs to balance.
Okay, this next clip is from an episode entitled "The State of Our Teeth: What's Really Going On with America's Dental Health," and it featured Dr. Elliot Rotert. Obviously, no one loves going to the dentist. Maybe there are some people out there. I would find that odd, but the health of your teeth is incredibly important. So we wanted to get a look at the true state of America's dental health, whether it's improving or declining, and how modern dentistry compares with its, frankly, brutal past. And we also wanted to explore the real drivers of dental disease, the fluoride debate, which has become somewhat controversial, access to care, and emerging technologies, as well as what the next 20 years may hold for oral health in America.
How do you feel about the fluoride controversy in the water?
Yeah, I mean, I understand it. I do think I've always encouraged, I think people should think for themselves. I don't think you should necessarily, follow the herd. I think it's good to be aware of why we recommend these things. Fluoride is tough because there is, a lot of the claims are that it's poison. A good reason for that is we found that it can accumulate to pretty high levels in what's called your pineal gland in your brain, which affect things like your circadian rhythm. And there's studies out there that
I thought that was just, this is fascinating because I read something like that on the internet. But it was more in kind of a, yeah.
And that's kind of the problem is,
I thought it was a conspiracy theory.
It's not a total conspiracy theory, but it's overblown. My argument for patients who are a little bit more anti-fluoride is, sure, I do agree, and there are studies that show this stuff, but it hasn't really proven to be too negative. We are very aware that anything in your body in too great a concentrations is bad for it. A good example is your calcium causing those kidney stones. An overabundance of fluoride can cause similar issues. Whereas what we're wanting is the exact right amount, which is, of course, hard to achieve, but that's why it's such low concentrations in the drinking water. I know that there's a lot of push to ban that sort of thing. And I can understand the thought process is, you shouldn't be able to force something into my body in something like drinking water. The problem is we found such a reduction in cavities over the years due to this fluoride in the drinking water and in your toothpaste. So my opinion is that if you follow the instructions we give you of, drinking the normal tap water and using a fluoride toothpaste, but not swallowing it, we want you to spit it out, and we don't want you to use very much of it. A lot of patients use far too much toothpaste, and they're getting way too much fluoride.
So like limits. This is interesting because my grandkids, the 3 and the 6-year-old, the toothpaste is made for them to really like it. So it's like candy, and they want more and more and more. We shouldn't do that, should we?
The bubblegum flavor.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And a lot of those, we advise using a child toothpaste because they have far lower fluoride content. And if you're too young, like babies, you don't really want to use much fluoride, if any at all, because they're just going to swallow it, which we don't want.
That's interesting.
But it's good to be aware of it. And, I watch the studies pretty closely because it's a very, very common question in my practice. We live in Colorado. There's a lot of free thinkers around. But a few too many dive deeper into the conspiracy theories where, do I think it's a government conspiracy to control your minds? Yeah. I don't quite buy that.
You're already fairly common time.
you're a very proactive provider, so I see you doing exactly that. So it's
exactly. Well, and again, it's just we found so many connections between your body. My argument is, okay, we might have some negative consequences for fluoride, but if you're very cavity prone, you're constantly introducing all these little micro infections into your body, which, number one, obviously you don't want to have to deal with teeth wise, but also because it affects negative health in your body entirely. I just think those proven benefits that we found from fluoride far outweigh the possibility of negative effects.
Hey, this next clip is from an episode entitled HIV and AIDS, Still a Problem or More Urgent Than Ever. We invited Dr. Theo Hodge, one of our favorites, back onto the Don Sullivan Show to take a unfiltered look at the history and the current state of one of the late 20th century's most devastating health crises. He's one of the world's leading experts on the subject, and Theo explained how far we've come, what challenges remain, and what everyone should know about prevention and treatment today. And it was a fascinating discussion.
So as these drugs began to evolve, the first drugs we had, it was very easy to become resistant to them. And so as technology has developed, it's harder. It's not impossible, because if you mess up taking drugs enough, you will become resistant. But the drugs we have now, it is much harder to become resistant. So I'm less likely to run into resistance. But again, people have been with me nearly 30 years. So you have people who were on the very first regimens. And so they do have resistance. And resistance is permanent. Once you have it, you have it. Now, what has happened, particularly with my younger patients, is number one, now we've gone from, convenience and less side effects to patient-centered care and quality of life. So, my younger patients, they don't know anything about AIDS. They'll look at me and they go, well, my grandfather used to tell me about his friend that was in the ICU. And I'm like, your grandfather used to, because they have no clue of what people of my age group lived through. When I was in my 20s, you would go to the club and you would see somebody, and the next time you went, they weren't there anymore. And I was in my 20s. So this was a big deal. Or I would be in church and you would notice 3 or 4 people that were in the choir were no longer there. And they would say, oh, well, they had cancer. I'm like, what 25-year-old has cancer? I mean, as soon as, because you knew what was going on. Yeah. Well, these 25-year-olds today don't have a clue, because we were horrified back then. They're like, oh yeah, I heard about this. And so HIV is it's all about wellness. So I never present, when I'm talking to my patients about HIV, as doom and gloom. You just don't do that. You just say, hey, this is what it can do. This is what you need to do to prevent it from causing this trauma in your life, and go forth and be fabulous and live your life. So with that, most people get it. And particularly now, because as opposed to before, where everything was at least a pill a day, now we have the injectables. So we've evolved from taking a pill every day to injections, which came about in 2021, where you can get an injection, or I should say 2, because it's 2 drugs, because now we're down. We used to have at least 3 drugs that you needed to take, and you could put all 3 in one. And now we realize, okay, since we only have to interrupt 2 of the steps in the reproduction of this virus, then why should we use 3 drugs? We can use 2. So in the case of the long-acting injectable that we use, it's 2 shots, a drug with each shot. And currently, you can do that every other month, which for many of my patients, they love it, because they don't have to take a pill every day. Sure. In fact, that's the biggest thing, is that Dr. Hodge, you have no idea, taking a pill every day has occupied such a large mental space in my brain, which I never realized until this. I have to tell you.
I imagine.
I was really shocked. I mean, I'm telling you, you mentioned one of the most popular drugs, That drug happens to be the number one drug here in the U.S. in terms of prescription.
It's because I see it in the commercials.
Right. And that's one reason why that you would, that's why. But, you know, there are other reasons, such as the drug it's hard to become resistant to it. You have, I mean, there are side effects, but they're very few compared to our earlier regimens, which had horrendous side effects from diarrhea to ingrown toenails. I mean, it was horrible.
Ingrown toenail is a side effect.
They hurt. I've had plenty of those.
Know.
Okay, this next clip is from an episode entitled "Why Doesn't Western Medicine Include Orthopedic Assessments?" Physical therapy, when performed seriously and thoughtfully, is essentially the medical version of athletic training, except it could be included in a regimen of preventative care proactively. But orthopedics as a discipline has very little interest in assessments at all. It may be the only medical concern that is nearly 100% reactive. So we talked to Brad Marquez, the CEO of Physiopractice and lifetime practitioner of the medical science of physical therapy, about this trend. Do you think the trend towards specialization has kind of had a negative impact, towards what you're describing?
Absolutely. I think it's great in theory that somebody's going to be very good at one thing, but you lose the big picture of, you can't treat somebody globally if you're only an expert in one small subsection. Like Don was alluding to, we're old school. I like a big toolbox. I don't want just two tools. I want a big toolbox. I want to be able to draw from multiple disciplines to be able to really be effective to people. And even if I'm going to talk about my friends in the chiropractic field, I mean, the best chiropractors, in my opinion, are the sports medicine faction, because they also integrate this sports mentality and use the PT modalities and tape and all of that mindset to help their clients. So there's really a wonderful blend in that lane, and that ilk of clinician also tends to look very globally at the person's health.
So there's so many examples here that I can give, and again, I'm obviously on this show very open with myself because there's a lot of examples that come from me, from a long period of time and a lot of different experiences. But just as an example, and you can comment on this, Brad, along these lines, that it was just a few weeks ago, and I'm not going to get into the details of this because we will have future shows on it. But I have a couple of internal problems that you actually fixed inadvertently, or at least you relieved the symptoms of inadvertently for a short period of time without even being aware that you were doing it, by within the context of exactly what you were just saying, working on me from the perspective of my overall body. You constantly look to see initially whenever I visit as to whether or not my alignment and my spine is right, and usually it's not, and then work on my range of motion, sometimes it being somewhat unpleasant, and and then really stretch me to the limits that are sane and possible and healthy for me. And obviously that range of motion does the trick. And do you remember the one time I walked out, and about a little later that afternoon I told you whatever the internal symptoms that I had amazingly gone away? And that fits that example.
As long as I don't create any further injury, we're achieving all of our goals, right? Our maximization goal.
Well, and really what I'm kind of getting out there is the fact that when you do approach, and this is a very Asian Oriental, from the old school way of thinking, way of looking at things, as opposed to the Western approach of vertically examining very narrow channels and disciplines. So often is the case, one doctor will give you a medication that another doctor doesn't know about. And another example with me is I was asked years ago, because of bone density problems, to take calcium.
supplements. And then a few years later, I was determined, guess what? I have kidney stones. Stop taking the damn calcium supplements.
Those are the worst.
Right.
And I still do. So that's not the problem that Brad dealt with before, but that might be in the future.
Definitely not one I'm going to help you with.
Yeah, we'll see that. You don't know that is the point. The point is when you work on me from that holistic perspective, when you work on all of your patients, some of whom are less willing than I am, I suppose most of whom are, they will benefit tremendously from that broad to starting from the whole body perspective into looking at the individual problem whatsoever. And that is something that, to a very large extent, from what I've seen, and I've been to a lot of physical therapists other than you, unfortunately, over many, many years, that is not common anymore. To look at, oh, you got a problem with your elbow, let's rub that around, let's look at it, let's do exactly what the doctor said on the prescription, and then ask you very politely if there's anything else I can do, hand you a Xerox sheet of exercises to do, and see you in 3 weeks, right?
Okay, so these next clips are from 2 different episodes and 2 different guests, both on the topic of AI. The first episode was one of our earliest ones, featuring Gina Rosenthal, and it was on AI, how it works, is it real, and where is this all going? And basically, we wanted to understand the current revolution, the key technologies, and the substantial benefits in business and our personal lives, as well as the dangers and the need for guardrails. Don also complained about the fact that he does not have a Jetsons-like housekeeper yet. And in addition, I wanted to feature a clip from another episode where we had ethics expert and founder of Ethical Tech Matters, Marion Newsom, on to talk about ethics in the AI era, what we can do versus what we should do. And this was a really interesting discussion. We highlighted some trends and some issues that, quite frankly, were a bit disturbing, but I think both of these episodes do an excellent job of encapsulating the current debate and the current scope of things with regard to the current technological revolution.
I think it's what you said earlier. None of that works without data. We have to remember that somebody's feeding the data to create something.
Yep.
And what do they want from us? I think one of the patterns is nothing's free. Especially now, if it's free, they're using you to do something for this.
We're the data.
We are the data. Yep. We are the data.
So I think
if the product is free, it's actually you are the product.
Exactly. So I think that's one of the patterns to be really careful of.
But what, on the opposite side of that, then, what patterns are the most important to embrace?
Well, I think that's it, is thinking. Think and question everything, because there is so much opportunity for AI to do good.
It's frightening, and here's where, to me, the question lies, and there may be an answer, but we don't have it here. It's in another Supreme Court decision, which is that something that I support in every way. It's that of the name, image, and likeness protection and it was specifically for college athletes, as I was 40-something years ago, and I was an indentured servant. And to be honest, the whole concept, in my opinion, of a student athlete is a definition of indentured servitude in sports. These are all professional franchises, but I digress. The point is that your name, image, and likeness is now protected, and you own it. But you don't own the data, which means that this very tiny spot that I'm pointing to, which the audience can't see at the top of my head, is a data point, which follows the calculations that would base me or somehow rate my level of beauty. Steve would be ahead of me, but rate my level of beauty on this model scale, and every other piece of data that could be publicly obtained in some publicly available picture. That data is available, and therefore, and then wait to see where I go with this, Mariam, but therefore, a image of me can be created that is close to me
or a composite of me and Steve, or me and Steve and 1,000 other people that isn't me. And that is effectively what Steven did to scare the crap out of me a few weeks ago, is arbitrarily create someone who had a lot of my attributes, who looked like me in certain ways, but clearly wasn't me. What now we're not going to come up with an answer for this, and we can't possibly hope legislatures could, but there's an overlap here which is absolutely frightening, which I don't think is getting any attention at all.
Okay, for these next clips, we turn to, again, 2 different episodes and 2 different guests on a subject that's a personal favorite of mine. I think it's probably a favorite for lots of people. Music, of course. So the first clip is from an episode, it was episode 44, entitled How Heavy is Heavy Metal? With John Ducreuset. And in this episode, we went deep into the evolution of heavy metal, its origins, constructions, and the cultural consequences of the strange, powerful, and often chaotic world of heavy metal, guided by a professional musician. Now, in addition to that, I'm highlighting an episode, I think it was the second episode we did with Howard Ostro, who is another musician as well as a music historian and Silicon Valley insider. And the title of this episode, it was episode 32. It was Modern Music Streaming versus Vinyl, Digital versus Analog. Yes, folks, we wanted to get into that whole debate and understand how, one, modern computing has reshaped how music is created and distributed, shifting from traditional instruments to digital production, but how this, is this technological evolution stifling musical expression, or is it more complex? And of course, why, to some people, things just sound better on vinyl. I was actually playing some records earlier, so I am a part of that debate as well. Anyway, enjoy. When was the term heavy metal? I know it existed previously within the context of chemistry, but when did folks start using it to apply to actual music? I'm assuming perhaps after, after bands like Black Sabbath, maybe Led and Judas got underway. It always happens after the fact that they start categorizing these things, right?
Led is perfect in that sense, right? I mean,
right. Yeah. I don't know if there's an actual, like, this is when it was first, kind of emerged as a concept for a subgenre of music.
So what's interesting, now this is a weird one. I did what everybody does these days, and I did a fast search because that question, I wasn't sure. And it says William Burgess was one of the few people in a writing in 1961. But its use, and this is a funny one, the 1968 Steppenwolf song, Born to Be Wild.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
Which features the line heavy metal thunder.
Interesting. I mean,
it does,
you hear that in, like,
that's true. Wow.
Straight out of 90s, movie previews, trailers, Born to Be Wild. That's great.
What's really silly is what's even a weirder thing, right? So my possibly favorite guitar player, who's not well known, he's well amongst guitar players, he is a god. Eddie Van Halen considered him as a god. Alan Holdsworth. And Alan Holdsworth, what it says here is William Burroughs used this term heavy metal in his novel The Soft Machine to describe a character, right? Alan Holdsworth had a band in England in like 72, 73, and you could find videos of him on YouTube playing with the Soft Machine. So I think that that's so funny. And it's just, if you look at his playing at that time, you'll be blown away that why didn't anybody know this guy? He's like insane, like insanely but it's just sort of funny, but I don't really find like that's not necessarily when the first usage terms of this. It actually says like in the 70s, Judas Priest was clearly a heavy metal band. You know, I
Yeah.
don't think when Ozzy came out, when Black Sabbath came out, that it was necessarily called heavy metal.
Well, it always happens later on, right? Even with
Yeah,
grunge, it wasn't like Nirvana put out their first album and was like, "We're part of the new grunge movement." There was like a press
yeah,
announcement that there's
Yeah.
this new
yeah.
genre. It's like
Well,
applied in retrospect, kind of, or along the way.
so along those lines, one of the things that I find utterly fascinating is that heavy metal, being as counterculture as it was, all of a sudden, in the late part of the century, inadvertently, accidentally takes a turn through Metallica into the deepest part of American culture, and that, of course, is baseball.
Now we've got a 2-track. Here's our beautiful 2-track. It's ready to go. We take it to a mastering engineer. The mastering engineer really does have to do a few things because there are some limitations to a cutting head cutting a piece of lacquer that's eventually going to be used to stamp out something in polyvinyl chloride, and having it so that a cartridge that you buy with a needle is going to be able to track it. So there's a lot of things that go into what happens there. First thing is, for most music, it's going to be compressed because if you hit a peak, it reach a point, the lathe isn't going to be able to cut it correctly. So at that point, you got a real problem. You're going to have to trash the lacquer, get another one out, and cut another one. Okay. So what they do is, because it's a little expensive to do, they just go ahead and say, we're going to put some compression on it and get it so that it doesn't do that. And so that's one thing. The other problem is high frequencies. High frequencies, as you're cutting the groove, and by the way, all records have only one groove. It goes from the outside of the platter all the way to the inside. It's a continuous groove. Even if there's no music there, there's still a groove. Okay. And anyway, so as you cut in, heat is a problem. And Don, you come from physics, energy, heat. Okay. Heat becomes a real issue. And so those high frequencies, if you think of a waveform that's doing little this, guess what it has to do? It has to cut the same thing in. And it's a real problem because the heat becomes an issue. So how do you think we solve that problem? Because you'd burn up a cutting head. You roll the high frequencies off. And that's what they do. As you cut in the record, you roll the high frequencies off. The other interesting issue is the amplitude itself, the loudness. If you have the longer the material that you're going to have on the side dictates how much of the amplitude that you can actually transfer to the vinyl. So a typical side on a LP is 18 to 20 minutes. And it's that way for a reason. Because if you try to go further, and you can, the amplitude has to be brought down so it's quieter. Okay. So all these things go into play, and these are all part of the entropy that's part of the analog systems. And that's why when people say, well, that's not natural, it's just noise, I stop and go, oh, it's entropy, it's very natural. And when people say, well, vinyl just sounds warmer, it just sounds smoother. Well, you don't have the major peaks. They've been pulled out because the cutting head wouldn't be able to do it. And when you roll out the high frequencies, it does sound a little warmer. It really does.
Yeah.
What do you mean? What do you mean by warmer?
Don, I'm glad you answered that question, because that's what people say.
That's what I'm here for.
It sounds warm. Well, with most people, at least when I, really talk to them, the warmth, in their opinion, is the lack of what would you say? It's not overly bright. It's not harsh.
A little muddier, or it can be, I guess, depending on how you're looking at it. But yeah, warmth, a little muddier.
Yeah.
As we continue with these various euphemisms referring to parts of the earth, I'm still not sure what it means exactly. I mean, that it feels more sharp to the ear in the sense
Yeah,
that
that would be yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
To me, some records sound less sharp, but I guess it depends on the music too. But I guess
Sorry, Steve, I'm experiencing a little bit of delay, so I'm not really hearing the end of the sentence.
Oh, I was saying to me, some records can sound less sharp. They can sound warmer, but also a little muddier. But they don't seem as
Yes,
compressed as
that
digital.
is pretty much. I agree with you there, and it's because of the limitations of the technology. It's going to tend to do that. We cannot take a performance and capture it in its entirety with its dynamic range and be able to do it across that chain I talked about. It's not possible. It's going to be changed. And I use this description. Analog and especially vinyl, think of it as more like a painting than a photo of the performance. Look at a painting and you can see if you look really closely, it's not the same, is it? But when you back away, it kind of your brain fills it in. In a way, analog's similar to that. It's
I
not
think
an
that's a good
exact
analogy. Of course, it would not be a proper best of Don Sullivan Show compilation without a clip from one of our episodes about watches. We've had Jason Hahn on twice. He is a horology expert, all around great guy, and he is a friend of the Don Sullivan Show, and he is our, I guess you could say, resident watch expert. And this clip is from episode 40. Art Meets Engineering series. It was on the magic of watch movements, drilling down on how they work from a mechanical standpoint. And I can tell you this, folks, if there is a Watches of Switzerland or 1916 Watch Company store near Mount Kilimanjaro, we will probably hear about that from Don on his recordings, but in the interim, here is a trip down memory lane with regard to watches.
I love how you say that, because it really is. It is a personal connection with these small little devices, which are more than jewelry and they're more than functionality. They actually clearly do become part of your everyday being. It's amazing how that kind of psychologically happens to us. But I'll also say this. These parts are incredibly small and incredibly delicate. And I saw a picture the other day of a tiny little actual manufacturer's screw. I forget if it was stainless steel or titanium, two of the main minerals, really, or two of the main substances that are materials that are used within these devices. And this tiny screw looked absolutely tiny next to a grain of rice. And the grain of rice towered in this very blown up picture over this tiny screw. These things are incredibly small. Drew and I sat through a lecture at Patek Philippe a few days ago, and we sat there for 2 hours and we listened to the representative, because they're more than sales associates, they're more than systems engineers as we have in the computing world, and he went through 2 hours of the inner mechanics of the differences in what they do with the teeth on those gears, particularly escapement you mentioned, and how they're slightly rounded and hand polished to make them basically more durable and more effective and more accurate. It's utterly incredible the amount of care and precision and love that's actually put into every single operation. Am I right about that, or am I just over reading into it there, Jason?
No, with manufacturers like Patek Philippe, Breguet, A. Lange & Söhne, part of the reason that the watches cost as much as they do is that level of attention, that hand craftsmanship of getting in there with sometimes literally pieces of wood with an abrasive paste and polishing every single part, facet, crook, and cranny. it takes a lot of time, and time equals labor. And as we all know, labor is not free. And, it can sometimes take hundreds or thousands of hours just to complete a single watch, depending on the watchmaker. And obviously those watchmakers also need to take home a paycheck.
Yeah, it mentioned to me during this lecture that some of the more higher complication, again, that's another watch club word, complication instead of feature, but it's ubiquitous, that take up to 10,000 man hours. That's 5 years of one person's work.
Yeah, it's incredible to think about, and it when you think about it in that perspective, it's no wonder that some watches can get into the hundreds of thousands and sometimes millions of dollars.
So
They
let's
use precious stones in it seems like as bearings in the actual movements. Is that for decoration, or is there a specific purpose for those too?
So the pivot points on a movement where essentially the springs and or the gears and all the running gear is mounted to, those are friction points, and watchmakers use jewels. And so anytime you see a jewel count on a watch, it's how many of those jewels are being used in that movement. The reason that jewels are used is because they are extremely hard, and because it's a friction point, it reduces the amount of wear and tear on the actual part. If it was metal on metal contact, that would wear itself down relatively quickly, and you would need to service and replace parts much more frequently. Now, typically with those jewels, they are manufactured rubies, so they're not usually going to be using mined natural stones, for one, because of the cost, but also with something that's lab grown, it's you can control the level of purity in that stone as well.
So that when they mention a number of jewels in a spec sheet, it's not just a vacuous brag that we have this many jewels. There actually is a real functionality to it, and it does sort of indicate a different level of quality when they have a lot more, because of the removal or the elimination of a lot of those friction points.
Okay, continuing the art of engineering theme, while that started out with just timepieces, it obviously reaches far beyond that as a foundation. So, this clip is from a very recent episode on the triumph of human architecture. We welcomed renowned interior architect Frederick Taylor for a wide-ranging conversation on the extraordinary achievements of architecture and how design, engineering, and human vision combine to create spaces that endure. It was a really interesting episode, and we also got into the what appears to be the decline of McMansions as well as open concept.
One thing I'm heartened to see is that houses are getting smaller.
You're not a fan of the McMansion era, I'm assuming.
I will confess now. I used to work the dark side of the force. I have done my share of spec houses for developers. But 20 years ago, you were putting 7,000 square feet on a quarter-acre lot in Bethesda, Maryland, and they could sell them as fast as you could pop them out. Nobody wants that anymore. The 2 spec houses that I have done since then have been less than half that size. And what's interesting,
please continue.
And they're better houses. We spent a lot of energy and work, or at least I did, on those monster houses, trying to make them look like they belonged in neighborhoods built of fundamentally smaller houses.
So now, whereas the scientific thinking of design and efficiency is much more important.
Well, the truth of the matter is, single family detached dwellings are architectural dinosaurs. And I recognize that I designed them. But if you think about the efficient use of material, how the cost of heating and cooling something that's a freestanding little bubble versus row houses or multi-unit, there's no comparison. It's
Interesting. Never thought about that.
They are excessively self-indulgent. It was because but I can only do so much.
That was the American dream, though, you know?
It was, and we give that sort of stuff up very hard, and I get that. And there's going to be a market for that for a while, but it needs to be adjusted somehow so that we can do a better job of making things that are more human. One of the we in a sense we're adding one more criteria for architecture. We've got commodity, firmness, delight, and the other one might be sustainability.
Yeah. Oh, sure. Well, I don't think the younger generations can really afford to build McMansions anymore anyway, despite the fact that they were
Not
ugly
in
and
mass, they can't. No,
not in mass. Thinking about New Jersey, you had a lot of towns where they'd creep in and it would be these huge McMansions on postage-sized lots. They can't do that anymore.
Even the people from that generation who can afford that, by and large, don't want that. They live on their phones. They get Uber Eats. They don't need a big kitchen, although that will be the last room to die. Because the big island with a 4-foot range in the middle, that's the vanity strip. That's the vanity thing for everybody. They'll put that in a room they'll put those in a house with no dining room.
I have a dining room. I am a fan of the old school dining room. That is a hill I will die on. But I know they're dying out, Rick.
You live in Morris County. You got a lot of space.
It's interesting that one of my houses that I'm doing for developers, it's a tight little house and it's on a corner lot, a tricky lot, and it's got the obligatory kitchen family room combination, but there simply wasn't room on the site to do a big house that had a living room and a formal dining room. So we actually combined the living room and the dining room into the grown-ups room, and it's a very elegant room, and it will be just big enough to hold the dining room table and a couple of sofas in one room. And you can throw the kids in the family room with the kitchen, and they can forage, and you can have a conversation, a glass of wine in the other room, and be as far from them as you possibly can in a little bitty house. So we're excited. I'm excited about it, and that is not groundbreaking architecture, but I think it's I think it says something that's worth considering on other projects. We've had to condense houses little by little, and once rooms get to a certain scale, they can't get smaller. They have to be combined.
Yeah, our final clip of the Best of Don Sullivan compilation thus far comes from an episode entitled Exploring Katmai National Park with Alaskan bush pilot Benjamin Bunn, and we talked about salmon and bears and the cycle of life. It was an absolutely fascinating episode. Don had the opportunity to be flown, guided, and escorted through untamed wilderness by Alaskan bush pilot Ben Bunn, who is a remarkable human being. Katmai National Park is a absolutely breathtaking place. And it was fascinating discussion on not only the cycle of life with respect to salmon and how that impacts the wider ecosystem of the area, but I wanted to make sure we highlighted some amazing stories that Ben shared during our discussion, including dealing with bears, as well as survival stories in the Alaskan wilderness.
They were our ground crew there at our base of operations. And a bear, a younger bear, not a young bear, but, a teenager, a middle-aged bear, had gotten used to robbing trash from people's cabins all through the village. He'd come through at night, and he'd decimate your trash can, and off he'd go with all, whatever scraps he could find out of it. And he was getting pretty ornery and started doing it in daylight with people around. And he showed up at our base of operations, and our 2 staff were there. And they had a 20-minute standoff with this bear from all of 6 feet away. He was kind of on this little bit of a hill. He was up top, they were down below. And this bear kept charging them, false charging them, and then backing up a little bit, and then would charge them again, and then back up a little bit. Now, when I say a young bear, people are thinking small bear. This is a 6-foot bear. This bear would snap your neck if he got a good swipe onto your face. And he kept charging them and then backing up, and then would get to some lower ground and then charge them again and then back up and then come down to some lower ground. And from 5 feet away, they put an entire can of bear spray into its face from 5 feet. And he sniffed and he blinked a couple times and then he charged again. And it in that case, it was the lead that did the job, and they did everything properly. They went through all the channels. They called the troopers. They skinned it, and the troopers came and interviewed everyone that was there, because it was multiple people there. Decided that it was a necessary kill in that case, that this bear had gotten way too accustomed.
Whoever took the shot had to be very good at it. You've got to hit them right in the heart, from what I understand. If you shoot for the head, it's just going to bounce off for the most part.
Not the head.
Really?
The skull is so thick.
Yeah.
Oh, it's
So
too
thick.
thick. They're too thick to shoot in the head?
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
What do you shoot for the heart?
Because it's broad, right? But what weapon did they use, can I ask?
They had a couple. The gentleman who had the bear spray also had a revolver for I can't remember what the caliber was. And then the other gentleman who was backing him up had a lever action 357.
Yeah, that's what this guy that I met in Yellowstone had, a 357 with him. I don't know if he was that capable, but you better hit them right in the heart.
A lot of stopping power.
Or they're going to still keep coming after you. All right, that's
I'm assuming a 22 would be worthless in that scenario.
22 might make things worse.
Yeah, just annoy it.
38, probably not much better, but
Yeah. No, so my opinion with it is, if you are not comfortable around firearms, then you shouldn't carry one. If you are not very well practiced with the firearm that you are carrying, then you should not carry one. And in 99% of cases, when you have a bear encounter, bear spray will work. But there is that 1%. And you have some people like us.
Especially when there are cubs involved, but in a case like yours, even more so.
And there's people like us who are just high risk. We're around bears way more than everyone else, and the chances that we see that 1% is pretty high.
Yeah.
But for your average hiker, so I'm sitting in my bed at 8 o'clock at night, and I get an InReach, which anybody out there who's hiking or camping, I highly recommend a Garmin InReach. It's a satellite texting little doohickey, absolutely incredible piece of machinery. And so I get an InReach from my friend, and he goes, "Ben, I'm stuck on a beach out in here. Here's my GPS coordinates. I need you to fly to this lake that's nearby and come get me." So I hop in the float plane, I fly over, I park on this lake, the sun's setting, I've got my sleeping bag, so I, tie the airplane all up, turn a flashlight on, point it at the airplane so this guy can see it, and I go to sleep, because I got to fly the next morning. And he made it to my airplane at 3 o'clock in the morning that night. He hiked from 9 o'clock at night till 3 o'clock in the morning with no flashlight, no rain gear, no waders. He had nothing. It was pitch black. He knew that as long as he stayed in the creek and he was going downriver, he was going to get to the lake sooner or later, and he'd find me. And he went down 2 waterfalls, not knowing they were there because it's pitch black. Ran into a mama moose with some cubs. Ran into a beaver, which he thought was a bear, and he ended up smoking that poor beaver out in the middle of nowhere because he thought it was a bear charging him in the water.
God.
And then finally got to me at 3 o'clock, soaking wet, head to toe, slightly hypothermic, tired as could be. And I flew him out the next morning to go to work, and he took a day or 2 off after that experience. So
that's worth a day or 2 off. Yeah.
Absolutely.
I'm sure your management was okay with that. Maybe a day and a half.
If I have to take a train, a plane, and then an Uber or 2, I'm like, oh man, that was a lot. That was a lot of journeying. Wow, that's a movie.
You don't have to go over the plot of the bridge at rush hour.
Yep. Pretty fun. He's a good man. He's doing fighter pilot training for the Air Force right now. Good man.
Wow,
yes, he is.
That's awesome.
You can't get better than that. So Godspeed to him.
Mm-hmm.
And
thank you so much, Ben. This has been fascinating.
So again, thank you.
Of course.
And, the audience thanks you. And anything else you want to add?
No, it's just a pleasure. Pleasure talking with you, Don, seeing you again. Really enjoyed taking you guys over there to Brooks. If anybody wants to come visit Alaska, look us up, Rainbow River Aviation.
Okay, so that includes our very first Best of Don Sullivan Show compilation. And it was a tough job because, to be perfectly honest, all of our guests are absolutely wonderful and fascinating. This thing would simply be like, 4 or 5 hours long if I were to take clips from every single episode. Because there is such a diversity, and they're all really interesting topics for us. So please stay tuned, folks. Don will be back from Kilimanjaro soon, and as I mentioned, we will certainly dive into that. We also have a number of really exciting guests coming up on the schedule, so stay tuned in the weeks ahead for new episodes launching. And in the interim, as Don always says, as always, whether you are struggling with grief, overcoming great personal adversity, trying to pick out a fine timepiece, or to architect something, or fighting off grizzly bears, or surviving in the Alaskan wilderness, all at bats are situational. Thanks, everyone.